Welcome to The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose, a production of LibertyNation.com, hosted by Mark Angelides.
It can be all too easy to fall into the trap of believing society is, as we know it, doomed. We see riots in the streets and neighbourhoods burned to the ground, and a level of political idiocy and deceit that almost seems unfathomable. But take heart, because one of the truisms of world history is that tyrants eventually fail. It may be a long and hard road, and the cost or burden could be more than we'd like to pay, but they do fail, always and inevitably. When we talk of tyrants, we often mean those who go beyond their allotted scope of power, usually to an illegal extent. Very often our minds jump to the atrocities of the 20th century under the leadership of the Nazis and communists, and the countless millions of souls lost to their particular brands of evil. Yet we should remember that evil, though the actions and attitudes were, at heart, these movements were about the securing of power for their leaders. History is littered with the names of those who sought to seize power, but we really only remember those who succeeded. And it hasn't stopped. We may think that despotism and land grabs are a thing of the past, but there are examples of it happening this very year. Today I'd like to talk a little about the motivations of these people. Many of them thought, and still think in some cases, that they were working for the cause of good. But tyranny with good intent is still tyranny. In Michigan, Governor Gretchen Whitmer was recently taken to task by the state Supreme Court, who ruled that her massive overreach in the handling of the coronavirus was indeed unconstitutional. This does not even include her policy of sending sick COVID patients to live with otherwise healthy elderly care home residents, which resulted in numerous deaths. But what was Whitmer's reaction to being told she had effectively disregarded the Constitution and therefore the law? Well, she doubled down and decided to keep her impositions in place via other methods. A twisting of the law is no doubt upon us. At what point do you take a step back and realize that when the Supreme Court is calling you out, it may be a good time to re-examine what you're doing? That she has decided to continue in her course of action is the hallmark of a despot. And there are many cases of despots like this throughout history, folks who just keep pushing for their own dreams of power and to hell with the impact on others. William Walker was born in 1824 and known as General Walker. He serves as a prime example of a man who would make himself king. That he was a talented man is beyond dispute. He studied law, graduating summa cum laude at the age of just 14, and went on to get his medical degree only 5 years later. But he was a man with perhaps too much anger and passion. He wanted more from his life and sought to gain it by his own hand. In 1853, he recruited a large number of people who supported slavery, convincing them that they could create an independent buffer colony. With 45 men at his disposal, and funded by his very own Sonora scrip, redeemable for land if his plans worked, he seized La Paz and founded the Republic of Lower California, later to become the Republic of Sonora, with himself as the first president. The effort crumbled after just a few months, and he was put on trial in California for violation of the 1794 Neutrality Act. He was acquitted after just 8 minutes of deliberation. Why so quick, you might wonder? Well, Walker was engaged in a process known as filibustering, and in the South, it was an activity not frowned upon. A filibuster was essentially a privateer who would foment or join a revolution, and while these fellows were seen by many in the American South as adventurers and exciting men, the British saw them as little more than pirates. Undaunted by his trial, Walker set his sights a little further afield. In Nicaragua in 1854, there was a major civil war between the Conservatives and the Democrats. The Democrat president needed firepower and invited Walker and a bunch of his toughest colonists to come along. A law was made that allowed the colonists to carry arms, presumably as long as it was in the service of the president. He arrived with around 60 of his favoured troops and joined up with 100 or so locals, and a series of battles ensued. He became the de facto ruler through military and by controlling the provisional president, with the US recognizing him as the legitimate government. In order to drum up even more support from the southern United States, he repealed laws in Nicaragua that prevented slavery. and this was at the root of his downfall. While Southern Democrats supported this move, the local people of course did not. He organized a fraudulent election and became president of Nicaragua on July 12, 1856. He had the support and recognition of the United States, but not the local people. An uprising ensued, and he was removed from office and returned home. In the introduction to his book, The War in Nicaragua, Walker displays that he thought himself to be the righteous man in the affair. He writes, quote, "To my comrades in Nicaragua, I dedicate this effort to do justice to their acts and motives. To the living, with the hope that we may soon meet again on the soil for which we have suffered more than the pangs of death, the reproaches of a people for whose welfare we stood ready to die. To the memory of those who perished in the struggle, with this vow that, as long as life lasts, no peace shall remain with the foes who libel their names and strive to tear away the laurel which hangs over their graves." End quote. Walker believed in the cause he was fighting and that it was for the good of the people. He lamented over the reproaches of the locals for whom he said he was willing to give up his life. A tyrant he may be, but his intent, as we find with many an historical tyrant, was in his own heart and mind noble. In 1860, the same year the book was published, he returned to the region, was apparently in the early stage of establishing another colony on the Bay Islands. This time, however, he was arrested by a British Navy commander and handed over to the local authorities, which was very much against protocol for the time. He was tried and executed by a firing squad. The ousting of Walker and his government in 1857 is celebrated to this day in parts of Central America as the equivalent of their own War of Independence. A more recent example of filibustering comes from an altogether unlikely quarter, the son of British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. On next week's Rabbit Hole, we'll be looking at how the British Prime Minister's son and a bunch of his well-to-do friends tried to carve out their own little kingdom, how Julius Caesar almost never came to be, and finally, why history so often covers up the worst excesses of the despot. Thank you for watching The Rabbit Hole. I'm Mark Angelides, and this is a LibertyNation.com production.
Go deeper on the topic discussed in this video, head on over to one of these links here or go to our Liberty Nation Roku channel. Thanks so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for Liberty.
The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose, a LibertyNation.com production. Available at Libsyn, Apple iTunes, Stitcher, on Roku, and other fine podcast providers.